Welcome to FO Exclusive. We are in July now, so we begin the second half of 2025. We've done 6 months of FO Exclusive already. And last month in June, we covered the US-Israel-Iran military clash and the deterioration of American political norms. This month, we have a lot to choose from. US President Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBBBA. I don't know how a bill is an act. I thought once a bill got through legislature, it was an act. It was no longer a bill, but hey ho, there we go. We live in curious times, Glenn. It's now law of the land. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act cleared the US Senate by just one vote. US Vice President J.D. Vance had to cast the deciding vote, enabling a 51-50 majority and pushing the bill over the line. This happened on July 1st after a 24-hour vote-a-rama. So I have to give credit to the stamina of senators. I wish I could give as much credit to their intellect, but we will swiftly move on and talk about what happens after the bill clears the Senate. It came from the House of Representatives, it came to the Senate, it went back to the House of Representatives, who then passed the bill on July 3rd on a mostly party line vote of 218 to 214. So this allowed Trump to sign the bill into an act on a date that was none other than July 4th, America's Independence Day. All jolly good, cause for celebration. Trump gets to be emperor. But the fly in the ointment is that economists estimate that OBBBA adds $3.4 trillion to budget deficits over the next 10 years. Well, this, of course, outraged Elon Musk. He had already fallen out with Trump, and now he has called for the creation of a new political party that would challenge both Democrats and Republicans. Musk is promising to fund challenges against Republicans who voted for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And Musk said, what's the point of a debt ceiling if we keep raising it? So Trump-Musk fallout continues. Even as that continues, Paramount Global made up with Trump. They reached a settlement with Trump. Apparently, Trump had sued CBS News, which Paramount Global owns, and Paramount Global will pay $16 million to Trump's future presidential library. How wonderful. CBS also cancelled Stephen Colbert's show. He doesn't like the T pronounced. So for those of you who are foreigners, who are not Americans, who don't live in America and don't watch American television, Stephen Colbert is one of probably America's most popular comedian. He has been highly critical of Trump, and therefore it became inconvenient to have him around. And interestingly, the Trump administration approved Paramount's $8 billion merger with Skydance. So was $16 million just an act of goodwill for the great leader, or was it protection money to capo di capo? Who knows? But we are living in interesting times in America, to say the least. But not everyone is worrying about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The S&P 500 broke a new record, shrugging off concerns about trade wars. NVIDIA has become the world's first $4 trillion company. Importantly, India's GDP is $3.5 trillion. So NVIDIA's value is more than what 1.4 billion people earn in a year. Oracle also surged, so did Nike, many other companies surged, so the US stock market is performing swimmingly well. Unfortunately, the British government is not. The British government performed a U-turn on welfare reforms. British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer refused to back Chancellor of Exchequer Rachel Reeves in the House of Commons. Rachel broke down in Parliament, tears streamed down her cheeks, and British bonds crashed. It wasn't just Britain tightening the belt. French President Francois Bayrou declared that France is addicted to public spending, and he outlined a spending freeze. Yes, sorry, French Prime Minister. My apologies, not President. President is Emmanuel Macron. And Bayrou outlined a spending freeze. He cut benefits. He also declared a vaguely defined solidarity contribution from the most affluent to help get the budget deficit under control. Bayrou also wants to touch France's sacred cows, public holidays, and he is threatening Easter Monday and Victory in Europe Day to boost growth. Expect demonstrations, maybe more gilets jaunes. Speaking of the UK and France cutting spending and adopting what some people would call neoliberal policies, in Chile, Jeanette Jara, I don't know how to pronounce her name. I hope it is not incorrect. She won the primary to be the left's presidential candidate. Notably, she's a communist. So 52 years after General Augusto Pinochet overthrew the socialist government of Salvador Allende, we have a communist tilting for the highest office of the land. Hey ho, Glenn, for all the efforts of the CIA in 1973, you're still left with the challenge of communism.
It was part of the plan.
Indeed. There are so many things going on. More than 3,000 people have died in Haiti, next door to the US, in gang violence. That's the downside. On the positive side, Australia, or maybe not so positive side for teenagers, Australia has banned YouTube for teenagers. So on the whole, we could cover a lot of things. And just as we were preparing for this FO exclusive, we learned that Donald Trump has just announced that he'll impose a 25% tariffs on goods from India, plus an additional import tax because India has been purchasing Russian oil. So watch this space, lots going on. Yet, despite all that is going on, the top three issues we have chosen are as follows. Number one, US reaches trade deals with the EU and Japan. Number two, tectonic diplomatic shift on Palestine. Number three, MAGA rebellion on Jeffrey Epstein issue. So without further ado, let's launch into the first one.
Before we launch into that, I will note that everyone will have heard, by not hearing, that I've been sitting in silence. There are a couple of reasons for this. Of course, your brilliance. But it's also known that if one doesn't speak, one does not appear foolish. So I'm trying to be owl-like wise. And then I think perhaps the response to what's happening in the larger issues that will concern us all is for me to play the role, I think it was of Laurel and Hardy, who was largely silent as absurdity crashed around him, and then appeared hapless, but a sage, perhaps, I think. And maybe that's the only way to make sense of a truly remarkable period in global history. So tell us why the EU and Japan trade deals, I use the term under advisement, are significant or not.
Well, they're significant for a start because Trump went to Scotland, played a lot of golf, promoted his golf courses, and made deals. What's not to like? Even the weather wasn't too bad. It didn't rain too much, or maybe it did. Maybe I didn't notice it. So we must all buy the art of the deal. So what happened in Scotland, or rather what happened on Trump's golf course? European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen showed up to pay homage to Emperor Trump in Brexit Britain. and was rewarded with a preliminary trade agreement. What is this trade agreement? Well, the US will impose 15% tariffs on European exports, especially cars. Some European goods will face zero tariffs, such as aircraft, ship-making equipment, chemicals, and raw materials. In return, the EU will buy more American fuel and AI chips and invest $600 billion in America. The US also agreed a trade deal with Japan. It lowers tariffs on this deal, lowers tariffs on cars and other goods to 15%. In return for the Japanese investing 550 billion in the US. So the EU is going to invest 600 billion, the Japanese 550 billion. That makes it over $1 trillion. Also, Japan will always receive the lowest tariff rate on chips and pharmaceuticals of all the pacts negotiated by Washington. Unlike the US-EU deal, there was no joint statement on the US-Japan deal. So Glenn, what does this deal-making mean? Well, and you can add to the points I have, and we can take it forward. Well, number one, I think we have avoided all-out trade wars. So we are not quite in smooth, holy territory of the 1930s. Number two, the US is still the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Number three, the US can and is throwing its weight around. Number four, both the EU and Japan have decided to appease the US. Number five, the rules-based free trade order is now dead, and the World Trade Organization, the WTO, is irrelevant. Number six, the deals themselves are ephemeral, increasing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, VUCA, in trade, business, and the economy. Over to you, Glenn.
So here's where I actually do have something to try to say. First, a detail, which is the substantive. The detail might imply that it's not that significant, but I think this is telling. I'm a strong supporter of U.S.-Japan relations, and I think the Japanese have done as well as one can do in the current context. But one of the consequences of the U.S.-Japan agreement now is that cars manufactured in Japan and then sent to the United States, sold in the United States, are subject to lower tariffs than cars that will have been manufactured in part or whole in Canada. Detroit is a city right on the US-Canadian border, and Windsor, Ontario is just across the border and is essentially part of Greater Detroit, or you could say Detroit is part of Greater Windsor, however you want to describe it. And the automobile industry is astride the factories and the offices and the business. Literally sit astride the US-Canadian border there. So now Japanese cars will benefit from lower duties than cars made, quote, in Canada. Canada has the longest border of the United States, is the closest ally the U.S. has, the largest trading partner the United States has, and so on. And if we've done in the Canadian-American auto industry, I don't know, but it certainly hurts it relative now to Japanese imports. That's just one of the infinite number of details where these what we'll call the bilateral trade deals, which I think glorifies them more than they deserve, will distort economies of scale, trade flows, capital flows, and the most efficient allocation of resources and development of the U.S. economy or any other economy that's involved, touched upon by these. So your second point, the U.S. is still the 800-pound gorilla in the room. I think the significance of the deal making is that most people in my lifetime, perhaps not most, but many, and certainly a majority of the progressive strains of non-American populations have their default position is that the United States has queered the system for its own benefit and was hypocritical, and it was really this imperialist power. And much of that is really, frankly, wrong. And I think what we are seeing now is, in fact, the realization of what the U.S. has been criticized for having been. And it shows the contrast between the normative system, imperfect as it has been, compared to a might makes right system of spheres of influence and bilateral deals, which is where we are now. And I wrote a piece assessing what the Trump administration meant for the U.S. and for the world right when Trump was elected. And the title is Nastier and More Brutal. And others and I have been saying for a long time that the normative system was struggling, and this is largely its death knell. As you said, Atul, in your fifth point, rather, but the rules-based trade system being dead now. And we'll see that. So the consequences are most countries, almost no country, can afford, literally and figuratively, to challenge the United States right now on issues that the U.S. Decides are significant. That even includes the European Union, which is one of the three largest economic powers in the world. And the consequences of that are some deals for the United States that sound nice, but in fact will lead to less efficiency for the United States itself, and certainly for everybody else. And this is an historic and terrible shift or development in the world order, or now disorder. It is the triumph of the system that Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Donald Trump, or the thinking faction of the Republican Party that supports him, have been pushing for. And we will all pay the consequences, whatever the herd of buffaloes, or I should say bulls, are momentarily saying on Wall Street.
So, in a nutshell, more uncertainty, as we've been predicting, as at FY, the geopolitical risk arm both of you are part of, more business uncertainty, and we can expect inflation, rising interest rates, rising costs of doing business, disrupted
if
supply
I can jump
chains.
in and really underscore that point. There's been a lot of crowing by the administration, of course, meaning the Trump administration, and by conservatives and by observers in general, saying, oh my goodness, the economy still is strong, interest rates are low, inflation is not very high, investment remains up, look at the stock market, all of this seems great. Okay, if you take your introductory course in micro and macroeconomics, you'll learn that the shortest term interest rates, say 3 to 6 months, treasury bonds and so on, if they rise or fall, the effects on the economy take, generally speaking, this is broad brush, but generally speaking, 6 months before they start to show any effects. That's for the shortest term rates. If you take longer term rates, like 18 months, a year, 18 months or longer, for those to have a measurable effect on the economy, a substantive, not a reaction by a market, but a deeper effect on investment, hiring, and so on. That takes 18 to 24 months. So we're now in month 6.5 of the Trump administration. And the changes, rapid as they've been, and I'll give him credit for being rapid in many of his actions, have literally not had time to work their way through the economy. Now, tariff increases too. The effects have been a reaction out of anticipated consequence so far, because Trump has said everything and nothing simultaneously. And only now are certain rates settling in, which other people have noted are the highest tariff rates since 1930. And all economists agree that one of the important factors contributing to the Great Depression, where there was 25% or more unemployment in the United States for 5 years or so, and similar devastation in Europe, if not worse, came in part because of tariffs and the inability of debitors, which was European nations, to pay their bills because they couldn't conduct trade as they needed to, or obtain capital as they needed to pay their bills to the United States, which then, not being paid for bills owed it, couldn't buy anything. So what we're seeing has not had has not had time to work its way through the economy. And I frankly think that people are whistling past the graveyard, or they're deluding themselves, and many are sincere in their optimism. But the consequences are real. The gravity exists, and if the motor stops, the plane will come down. And that's what will happen. That simply is, it's a fact.
Brilliant. For those of you who want to read more, learn more, we have a German economist named Alex Gloy. He is in the audience today. We have a Japanese economist named Masaki, both of whom write very regularly, write pretty detailed stuff with graphs, numbers, etc. If you want to discover more about what's going on in the metal space, whether it is gold and silver and platinum and palladium, we have an Indian economist and political analyst, Manu Sharma, who's also in the audience today. And he's been talking a lot about it. So lots to deep dive into, but we don't have time for it now. So we will move swiftly on to our second topic. And our second topic is the tectonic diplomatic shift on Palestine. I repeat, the tectonic diplomatic shift on Palestine. So what's going on in Gaza? Most of you have been following it. A lot of our audience knows about it. Starvation in Gaza is rising. There are images of babies clearly malnourished. Israeli operations have continued, although supposedly they are on a pause as we speak, but we don't know for how long. The UN has been warning that famine is playing out in Gaza. Forget the UN, forget international organizations. Now, Israeli organization, B'Tselem, I don't know how to pronounce it, and Physicians for Human Rights Israel have published two reports, significantly well-researched and documented, that say that Israel's conduct in the war in Gaza constitutes genocide against Palestinians. I know a number of Israeli officers and intelligence folks, so do you, Glenn. A lot of them have been saying privately that the war in Gaza should end, but the coalition government is beholden to the far right. And because because Bibi Netanyahu wants to stick to power, he's applied some glue on the chair and sat down on it. He is not going to do anything that threatens his grip on power. So the domestic politics of Israel means that the conflict has continued. Now, there have been airdrops. Jordan and the UAE have dropped food supplies, humanitarian supplies. Aid agencies have strongly criticized these airdrops and said they've damaged houses, in fact, collapsed some of them. But the key thing here is that even Donald Trump sees real starvation in Gaza. When he sat down with Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, he admitted that there was real starvation in Gaza, and he promised US aid. He suggested that Israel will preside over food aid distribution. So he seems to be cutting the UN out of the picture. So much so for international institutions created after 1945. Note the headquarters of the United Nations are in New York, not in Geneva, like the League of Nations. And Glenn, you were posted in New York, so you know the UN really well. The reality is that images of starving children, bombed out hospitals, and demolished homes have taken their toll. The tide of public opinion has turned in the two former imperial powers that drew up the lines of the modern Middle East. French President Emmanuel Macron has promised to recognize Palestine as a state. British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said that Britain would recognize, the UK would recognize a Palestinian state in September, unless Israel agreed to a ceasefire and a two-state solution. Now, obviously, both these countries were under domestic pressure. Public opinion had turned. In the UK, 130 MPs from Starmer's own Labour Party signed a letter urging such recognition. Obviously, Benjamin Netanyahu, said that this rewards Hamas's monstrous terrorism. But the recognition by France, or the declaration of the recognition, and the ultimatum by the UK is a big deal, Glenn. So walk us through what this really means. Are these just words? Is this just a bunch of effete Europeans in an aging continent, as the Israelis say, flapping around? Their words are full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, or is there something more going on?
I think both statements are true. It's always diplomacy is always fuzzy and sort of haltingly backs into results that more straightforward uses of force sometimes can impose, although they will raise their own unintended consequences. It's true that France and England are largely impotent in this. Everybody's impotent except for Israel and the United States. That's just about it in deciding for the short and medium term what Israel's policies will be. I and many have said for ages that Trump clearly has allowed his foreign policy, at least with regard to the Middle East, to be determined in the among the right-wing parties of Israel and in the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. He has given a pass or tacitly openly supported them.
Sorry to interject. To be fair, there isn't much difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump on Gaza.
Well, okay, I think that's a good point. Yes, that is a good point. The U.S. fundamentally has always ultimately been played, to use maybe an unfair characterization, by Israel, because the U.S. position is that we must protect and will always support the independence and survival of Israel as a sovereign state, and therefore Israel has been able to get away with more or less whatever it has wanted to do. That is true. And Trump has expressed some frustration. I think the assessment of the last 2 years, or I guess we should say 6 months, is that Netanyahu has succeeded in doing most of what he's wanted, and has played Trump to enable it. More specifically, for the largely, frankly, performative, but also with some substantive consequence, attack by the U.S. On Iran. And now I think the implications of what's happening with the aid or lack of aid to Gaza and the deaths there, leading to France and England's, Great Britain's decisions, is a de facto progressive, slow pushing out of the Gazans, the Palestinians, from Gaza. Netanyahu is careful enough, and probably hasn't made that decision to do himself, to say that no, anyone who wishes to leave voluntarily, of course, they should be allowed to do that, but we aren't forcing anybody. Well, you aren't forcing them, except that their population is starving and all the buildings are rubble, and the area that they can even have a tent grows narrower every day. And we do know that the right-wing parties explicitly seek to retrieve Gaza for greater Israel. That's been a millennial objective, multi-millennial. And de facto, this seems to be occurring.
On that note, both of us should give a shout out to Alan Waring, our British friend, who's published Tour de Force, quoting Israeli ministers. Now, you may agree or disagree with Alan, but what he's done is he's taken primary statements or primary evidence of what cabinet members have actually said to draw out this long-term plan. Over to you, Glenn.
There are some similarities. I don't want to be anyone to think I'm being flippant or facetious. I really am not, or too broad brush. Some similarities between the de facto evolution of events by the Israeli government with regard to the Gazans, Palestinians, and how history unfolded in the United States with Americans and Indians, Native Americans. Sometimes there were factions who said we have to kill every Indian and eliminate them. The only good Indian is a dead Indian, unquote. More said that that's a horrible thing, and of course you can't do that. We have to be humane to them, all while thinking, believing, acting in such a way that it was impossible to stop increasing settlement on lands that had thereto only been inhabited, if ever, by Indians, by Native Americans. The result was there are no more Indians, essentially. Well, of course, there are Indians in America, but their reign ended, and they were pushed out, pushed away, constrained, and now we have the world we have. And that seems to be de facto, if not de jure, the policy of the Israeli government now. It's the explicit policy, as I say, of the far right. So what consequence do Great Britain and France's decisions have? I think it can have over time, and this is what diplomacy, I think, can achieve. It can shift the center of acceptable ideal that you're striving towards. Or it's no longer a pie in the sky of only the Palestinians or the Muslims that the Palestinians should have a state. So in that sense, it's a substantive change. But the only two nations that can really affect Israel's policies are Israel and the U.S. So in a practical sense, probably for the foreseeable future, it won't have much consequence.
All right. I think the key consequence here is very simple. Bit by bit, Israel has been losing goodwill around the world. Bit by bit, the number of states that support Israel have been going down. Yes, Germany is still backing Israel to the hilt. In fact, Chancellor Christopher Merz said that, Israel is doing our work. But Germany has guilt, has guilt for the Holocaust. Other countries are moving away because they're increasingly seeing this as some form of ethnic cleansing or genocide. The takeover of the far right of the government in Israel is causing immense damage, not just externally, but internally. The divisions within Israeli society, I think, are more important. The fact that Israeli groups came out with reports is significant. Remember that before October 7, 2023, we had horrific, violent, and brutal attacks by Hamas. There were protests on the streets against Bibi Netanyahu's government. Secular Jews and the far-right religious Jews are increasingly at loggerheads. A lot of officers in the Israeli Defense Forces believe that the time has come to stop operations in Gaza and focus on Iran, because Iran may try something sneaky, something huge, as someone would say, soon. So the divisions in Israel itself will increase because a lot of these secular Israeli Jews value Europe culturally, and the loss of support in Europe for Israel will be significant psychologically, if not practically. Also, anti-Semitism is increasing, and now that the two states have moved against, or rather have have moved for recognizing Palestine, not necessarily against Israel. I clarify. Um, their own population, especially the immigrant Muslim populations, um, whether they are of Pakistani origin in the UK or Bangladeshi origin or of North African origin, will also feel more emboldened. So there are consequences, and the consequences are significant, and some of them uh, are what Donald Rumsfeld, Rumsfeld called the unknown unknowns. So there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and I think there are known unknowns, but there'll be unknown unknowns, and this is more significant than just the diplomatic fallout, which now brings us on to our third issue, and that is MAGA rebellion on the Jeffrey Epstein issue. And since, Glenn, you are the CIA man, you are the expert on strange uh, deaths
On
uh,
prurient scandals, of course. That's right.
and prurient scandals, and indeed conspiracy theories which abound. I cede the floor to you because what do I know about this issue?
That's right. No, you're an innocent. You're an innocent
Uh,
victim of Western
I'm
repression.
not a victim, but
Um,
I'm an innocent. I'm an innocent boy who grew up in the third world, in idyllic surroundings, riding buffaloes. What do I know about the ways of the world?
okay. Well, we're turning to farce, but also to one that is really quite sick, that is about very disturbing actions. It's a rare scandal, this Jeffrey Epstein scandal, that involves or has touched upon anyway Donald Trump, that has gained any traction. And this coming from, with regard to a man who has, at my last count, been the target of 89 indictments, a number of convictions, hundreds of millions of dollars of fines, and over 400 publicly documented instances of associations of one sort or another of him, his family, or his entourage with known and suspect members of Russian intelligence. But here we have pedophilia, and that has struck a chord. I think really it's not the pedophilia that struck a chord or stricken a chord, struck a chord, but the fact that this is a conspiracy theory scandal that has driven much of the MAGA or MAGA, if you aren't from Boston, right, and Trump supporters in the United States. And so therefore, it may be of consequence. So what is the scandal? And you'll have to forgive me for dealing with something that usually is on the local news pages of American newspapers. Talk about rapes, murders, floods, and disease. Jeffrey Epstein was a very successful financier. He made a lot of money on Wall Street. Well, good for him. And then once he did, he spent his time and his resources indulging his urges, which was to have sex with adolescent girls. Not only, but he, in Donald Trump's words, had a thing for the young ones. And the way he did that was by recruiting many of these young women to work in one of his enterprises or locations or another as a masseuse or an employee or something, and they would be trained to be accommodating, not only by, but significantly by Jeffrey Epstein's significant other, his girlfriend, a woman named Ghislaine Maxwell, who is the daughter of the prominent journalist, forget Maxwell's first name, Rupert Maxwell.
I don't think he was necessarily a journalist. I think he was the owner, the proprietor. He was the
Yes,
newspaper
yes,
baron, like
right,
Rupert
yes,
Murdoch.
Exactly.
I think if you name
So
your
Epstein
child
had,
Rupert, I think if you name your child Rupert, he has a bright future.
well, apparently there was a correlation between names considered unusual in a given society and higher degrees of success. But that's another subject. So Epstein lived in New York, Palm Beach, as a neighbor and friend of Donald Trump. And he had his own island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, no pun is intended, by the name of the islands. And he would fly these girls or young women there to work where they would be induced to engage in various acts and or debauched. So Epstein was arrested for this in 2005, convicted to 13 months in jail, a sentence in a trial that was roundly criticized because he was alleged to have gotten off very lightly for fear of having to pursue the case further and expose to prosecution a significant number of prominent American males, such as Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and the famous or infamous lawyer Alan Dershowitz, and so on. And there was a non-prosecution agreement as part of the deal, and he got out to much dissatisfaction. That's way back in 2008. In 2018, a decade went by. 2018, the Miami Herald newspaper broke a story of interviewing, quote, survivors, women who had been involved with Epstein and his, it's not a prostitution ring, what I don't know what you call a sex ring or activities. And that reopened the issue. And there was a lot of pressure to bring this man to justice. And so he was charged and imprisoned. And before he had come to trial in 2019, he was found hanging from his maximum security cell. Shouldn't laugh at someone's death in prison, something where this was not considered to be possible to have happened. Don't worry, we have video. We'll learn very quickly what was going on. Well, unsurprisingly, the 3 critical minutes of video before which he was alive and after which he was dead have been expunged, erased, disappeared. No one knows who did it. Nobody knows what happened. And now this gets to why the issue becomes significant, politically at least. Donald Trump's name has surfaced many times in the testimony as a friend, associate, and is alluded to in ways that are not publicly known yet, but always which are clarified by saying he is not alleged or to have done anything illegal that anyone's aware of. But Donald Trump and the conspiracy theorists on the right have ridden conspiracies to the White House by playing up all sorts of ones, that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile sex ring out of a pizza parlor in Washington, where I used to go buy pizza, actually. When I first heard that one, which is a separate scandal conspiracy theory and totally absurd and untrue, I laughed, thinking that no one would believe such nonsense. And of course, I am completely wrong. And a large segment of America is fascinated by this and believes this. And the whole QAnon phenomenon of conspiracy theorists by anonymous allegers, nothing ever documented or proven, almost everything disproven, have driven much of American politics and the Donald Trump phenomenon for over a decade now. And that's the case with this Epstein scandal for 2 primary reasons. One, Donald Trump's name is involved, and there is supposed to be a client list that Trump, during the campaign, pushed hard to have released, because this was a way to attack the Democrats, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, by extension, Joe Biden, and on and on and on. He said as soon as he was president, he would make sure this was released so the justice is served. His attorney general, Pam Bondi, pledged to do the same. And then as soon as she came into office, she informed him, Trump, that his name appeared multiple times in the testimony and so on, and in the client list apparently, not as a client, but his name has appeared. And so all of a sudden now Trump hasn't wanted to release the quote client list, which has infuriated the conspiracy theorists of the MAGA section of American society, which are his political base. And the second reason is that Epstein killed himself, and there became a catchphrase, a meme even, quote, Epstein didn't kill himself, unquote. Something I do not know the answer to, but even I would wonder about how someone could be alive 1 minute and then dead the next, precisely at the time when the video has gone missing. And when the guard who was assigned there under strict orders never to leave him out of his sight decided to pee at that very moment, or some such reason to absent himself.
It's straight out of a Godfather movie. It's straight out of a Godfather movie or a Mossad operation.
Oh my God. Oh my God. How can one ever be cynical about the paths of justice, please? So the Epstein didn't kill himself point or conviction, and the lack of the client list being revealed, publicized after years of saying that it's all about the Democrats, they're evil and will bring justice to America and undo the deep state and all these elite people who condescend to us, who are out having sex with 13-year-old girls, are being that segment of society is being frustrated because all of a sudden Donald Trump has decided that a conspiracy is a conspiracy, and let's turn the page. Now, will this have any consequence other than the prurient amusement of the American public? Well, the polls are relatively, as always, encouraging for Donald Trump. I would argue 63% of voters disapprove. However, most MAGA supporters, 56 to 38%, say, "Oh, this is all just the Democrats criticizing Trump. There's nothing here." All of a sudden, and most traditional Republicans, all of the brave souls sitting in Congress who do whatever Donald Trump tells them to do, 40% of them approve how Trump is handling this. 36% condemn, and 24 say, "Well, I don't know, never heard of this." So those who don't like Trump don't like what's happening.
Children's baseball games, Glenn.
That's what they're doing.
Legislation and meeting their constituents.
They're good family people. They're good family people. That's right. The Democrats have been trying to keep the heat on this. It's one of the few instances of an issue that has, for a lasting period of time, made Trump squirm. I suspect it will have some harmful effect on Trump and the Republicans in the midterms a year from now. But a year is a long time. And even the results of this tempest seem to me relatively moderate. But not that any of you listening or I think, needed to be informed that conspiracy theorists were contradictory with themselves and would believe what everyone believes at a given moment, or what they're told to. But that seems to be the phenomenon, which raises the larger issues, which we won't go into, of, and I'm being serious, of social, psychological, delusion, sincere delusion. And what comes to mind is the reaction of many communists in 1939, when for decades the Nazis, for many years, the Nazis had been denounced as the Marxist version of the Antichrist and to be opposed at all costs. And then from one day to the next, with some discomfort, but nonetheless, most communists did a complete 180-degree turn and said that, well, since the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany have signed a pact, they're now our friends and everything.
The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact,
which was the last step before the outbreak of fighting in World War II, for the dismemberment.
Just so that our viewers and listeners know, that was basically the partitioning of Poland between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union And in fact, the Soviets got most of Poland. Um, they
Right.
gobbled it up.
And
And
its relevance here, I think, is the
and just
broad.
one more thing,
Yeah,
and
please.
that caused massive cognitive dissonance amongst communists everywhere, including communists in India or say Indonesia or Vietnam, and still largely these communists remained loyal to Moscow and to Joseph Stalin. Over to you, Glenn.
Right. And that is the point. That's why I mentioned something from 1939, because of this social psychological phenomenon is that where groups will align with and actually believe the statements of their tribal leaders, and the facts really are minor in decisiveness.
So there's
So
one
I
thing.
think the
So
consequences of
there's
this
one
will
thing to
be
add. There's one
moderate.
thing to add, Glenn, that these phenomena have occurred throughout history, but social media has increased the speed of it. And echo chambers on the internet and the dark web and all that sort of stuff has just meant that something that would have taken months to spread now can spread in days or
Right.
hours. So that is the difference. Over to you,
And
Glenn.
I've actually had firsthand experience of this exact phenomenon with regard to Donald Trump. I'll fudge just a little bit to protect the innocent and the guilty, but and I'm not making a joke here. Lifelong friends of mine, lifelong, many decades, who I know have known and were immigrants, refugees from the Soviet Empire when I first met them as a boy, were ardent anti-communists, anti-Soviet, and therefore anti-Russian all their lives. But a couple of them have become Trump cultists, frankly, and have taken to denouncing me because I dared to say in public that I was alarmed by the infinite number of associations of Russian intelligence with Donald Trump, and that I had committed an apostasy in making such an allegation. And these people are sincere in their criticisms of me, and yet their entire lives were determined and shaped by the oppression and horrors of Russian totalitarianism and communism that they fled. It didn't matter. So I think we'll probably deal with a similar phenomenon here with regard to the MAGA crowd and the Epstein case. That said, to conclude, it will have some, I
On that,
think, some effect on Trump, a little crack, but not fundamental.
yeah. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we'll bid you adieu. We will see you next month in August. Have a lovely summer. If you are in France, enjoy your holidays while you still have them. And we will struggle through the heat in North America. Bye for now.
Bye.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.